Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the meeting, the January 7th meeting of the Lansing Charter Commission. Clerk Swope, would you please call roll?
Certainly. Commissioner Adam Simon.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Bauer. Commissioner Boyd.
Here.
Commissioner Dowd.
Here.
Commissioner Jeffries.
Here.
Commissioner Lopez. Commissioner Cooey. Commissioner Washington. You have 9 members present, a quorum. No members are absent.
Thank you. Motion be in order to adopt the agenda. It's been moved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. It has been approved. A motion would also be in order to approve the December 17th, 2024 minutes. It's been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, minutes are approved. Clerk Swope, public comment.
Okay, we are to public comment. Commenters will have up to 3 minutes to address the commission. First, we have Nicholas Zandy, followed by Heath Lowry. Could you hand me that remote control, please?
Hello there. I am Nicholas Zandy. I am from the Old Everett Neighborhood Association. I'm also its president. I want to make this very clear on my opinion on how the wards are currently structured. The way the wards are structured are not very good. I don't think 4 wards are nearly enough to adequately represent the city of Lansing. And the way the at-large seats are proportioned are completely inadequate because it will just keep too much power in certain parts of the city and not give enough power to underprivileged neighborhoods. And I'll tell you about, regardless of whether or not the 1950s thing was a coincidence or if there was actual motivation behind them, like race-based or class-based. But what I can say is that there are parts of the city where that shouldn't be together or should be together. First, there's Colonial Village, which is divided between 2 wards, wards 3 and 4. They are a very close-knit community. I've been to their association meetings. They are a wonderful group of people. They do not deserve to be divided. And dividing people away from each other despite being closely knit, I consider that to be, and people are gonna hate me for hearing this, that, my friends, is gerrymandering. And also, speaking of that, the Old Everett Neighborhood Association, we should not have to share a ward with Forest View. I mean, I'm not saying that I am against Forest View. I have nothing against them personally, but we are nowhere near similar in terms of neighborhoods. We should really be paired up with neighborhoods like Greencroft Park and Clifford Park. Those are much closer to the Old Everett neighborhood and are much more similar to the Old Everett neighborhood, even to the point where some of the signs are on the wrong side of the street. And so on Green Lawn. So because of that, I believe that we should be in the same ward as them and not the same ward as Forest View. And I believe that all Colonial Village should be within the same ward and not divided. And also, more wards will actually give more representation to forgotten neighborhoods and will actually make everyone represented equally, which is why I believe about 9 wards might be the best way to do it and get rid of the at-large. If not, maybe 7 wards and 2 at-large is a fair compromise. I don't know, but we should definitely not have half of the seats be at-large. That's all I'm going to say, and I shall yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Next, we have Heath Lowry, followed by Leslie Arnell.
Good evening, Commissioners. As it was stated, my name is Heath Lowry. I currently reside in the 4th Ward in the West Side neighborhood. I'm here to speak and to reiterate my comments from a few weeks ago, or a little over a month ago at this point, that we should expand the number of wards within our city council structure. Wards are more representative. As I pointed out in the literature that I mentioned in my last bit of comments. The studies show that wards are more representative of more people as opposed to moneyed interests that are more likely to be represented by at-large seats. With at-large seats, we end up, as an illustration, I sit on the Board of Zoning Appeals for the city. I represent the 4th Ward in that capacity, but also on that board are 2 members that are at-large representatives, but I live within a stone's throw of them. Not only are they in my same ward, but they're in my same neighborhood. And frankly, that isn't representative of the city as a whole in their interests. And those sorts of quirks are, frankly, a feature of the at-large system because they concentrate interests and demographics within the structures of power. I'm asking you to change that, whether it's completely changing over to a ward-based system on city council or reducing the number of at-large seats. Either would be a step towards progress for the city. Right now, we have one branch that's completely at-large, that's the mayoral branch, and then we have half of the co-equal branch in the legislative that is also at-large. This at-large seats are often touted as representing the whole city, and that need is there to balance out the wards and the particular parochial interests, but there's already more than half the power in the city is located in an at-large seat. So I think that balance is already there. There's no need to fear that the city's at-large interests won't be represented because the mayor does exist, and you've all voted to keep that in place. Thank you for your time, and thank you.
Thank you. And next, we have Leslie Arnell.
Hi there, Leslie Arnell, 1410 Sheldon. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, I echo Nicholas Zandy's comments. I would like that on the record. Brian Jeffries, you keep deferring to Swope a lot. He's not an elected official for the charter, and I wish that you would stop doing that. And I would ask all the commissioners to remember to use point of order if this continues to happen. You guys are elected to this charter, not Chris. And while we're on the subject, when I emailed the charter asking for help finding a comment, which I finally did, on our charter's Facebook page, Swope replied to me in this manner. This is the email I got back. I don't know what the big towering font was for, but it was extremely condescending and not the way you speak to somebody. That reply is a shining example of what's wrong with this admin and their lack of respect for the working impoverished of Lansing who are beyond fed up with being ignored. And honestly, Chris, I don't know who the phantom menace you think you are, but your .gov email means that you are a public servant. You can at least look at me when I'm talking to you. Thank you. You work for us, and as such, you do not address the public with such ableist disrespectfulness. I encourage you all to engage with the public and hear our voices. I did finally locate my comment, like I said, no thanks to Chris, which was about how there's no ordinances in place for repeat offenders with trash violations. We have a landlord situation in our neighborhood that is going on 4 years with no resolve. And I've spoken to a few of you about this, and I appreciate that. Lansing's citizens are fed up with moneyed people, like some of you up here, making decisions for your self-imposed thrones while literally ignoring those of us that continually pay for it. We are fed up with your fireside chats up there, playing with our livelihoods as you breeze through the ordinances. Yup, does that look good? Yup, check. You're like a pastor at a funeral who never met the deceased. Read the obituary, check it off. No. You were elected to make changes. That is what we, the people, voted for. And if you're not going to do what we hired you for, what our taxes are literally paying you for, do the courtesy to all of us and resign. Please. Your life won't change a whit, regardless. So please try to do the right thing. Please try to do the right thing in this instance. Please. Finally, Jody and Jasmine, thank you for your tireless work in being our voice. We truly wish there were 9 of you.
Thank you. That was our last person who had signed in. So we are 2 officer reports.
As chair, I have no report at this time. And vice chair?
No report.
Chris?
Just to indicate that there are some written communications in your packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now, we're two presentations, and our first presentation is from the former Mayor Hollister. He was going to join us by Zoom or Teams. Do we have him? Okay. Let's.
Microphone is still muted. Recording.
Here,
Hello?
Be a moment.
Now remember, don't touch this gate. Put a piece of paper there so you don't touch this. Okay. Hands down, hands down.
Good evening, Mayor. Can you hear us?
yes,
Okay, I believe you're muted.
Okay. How do you unmute? How do you unmute? They should be able to unmute us. Are you still muted? This is crazy. Can you hear us? You can, okay. Say, are you ready?
are you ready?
Yes, we are. There we go. There we go. Good evening, and before you start, we do have in our packets a copy of the memorandum that you sent, Mr. Mayor, as well as some comments from Commissioner Boyd. I just wanted to make sure all the council members had that. And I don't know how to address you, whether it's Commissioner Hollister or Representative Hollister, Mayor Hollister, Director Hollister, Dave. There's just so many to choose from. So I will call you Mayor Hollister because that's how I know you the best. So Mayor Hollister, it's your comments, please.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts and suggestions on the charter revisions. My viewpoint is based on 50 years of public service in the Lansing area. Before sending those, I discussed them with two of my closest advisors, Dave Weiner, the deputy mayor, and Bob Swanson, who was the finance director. And they support my presentation completely in the recommendations I'm about to make. But first, I wanted to personally thank each one of you for the time and energy that you have put into this endeavor. The task that you have undertaken might seem trivial and inconsequential at times, but I can assure you that this is an opportunity of a lifetime. And your decisions and recommendations will have a profound impact for years to come. In the past, a periodic tweaking of the charter may have been sufficient. But today, in part due to the pandemic, local policymakers are faced with complex, accelerating, high-stakes social, political, and economic challenges. I believe the times call for a bold, visionary, strategic, regional, and creative approach. Local leaders need new tools, new strategies. For example, the law that allowed a 425 tax sharing agreement was first used by us to keep Jackson Finance and Insurance headquarters in the region. That law is also used as a tool to keep GM, which required new approaches, new legislation, new incentives, and collaboration, and most importantly, compromise. The best way to facilitate creation of these new tools and strategies is to have a strong council and a strong mayor. But a strong mayor form of government. The strength between the council and the mayor adds to the equation. I support Andy Shore's thoughtful analysis and recommendations for this type of governance. The mayor's role is to develop and communicate a compelling vision and a plan for the city that translates the vision into reality. I doubt that as mayor, we could have kept GM in our region with a weak mayor form of government. Given the disruptive effects that are impacting our cities, the pandemic, impact on social and economic conditions, ongoing economic uncertainty, the housing crisis, climate challenge, artificial intelligence, population shifts, and political polarization, it is more critical than ever that we have a comprehensive plan for how we are going to address these and other 21st century challenges. My first recommendation is to make clear that the city's many stakeholders and the city's, my first recommendation is to make clear to all of our city's many stakeholders that our city's vision and values are. This can be done by including a preamble to the charter, which many cities have done, that incorporate values such as inclusiveness, transparency, equality, public participation, environmental stewardship, regional collaboration. My second recommendation is for us to require a mayor to collaboratively and inclusively develop a comprehensive strategic plan for the city. The plan would include a vision statement, and clear and measurable goals and objectives. It would enable citizens, city employees, businesses, community leaders throughout the region to understand where our city and our region are going, what strengths and challenges they face, and how they will get it done. It will also help citizens hold the mayor accountable for the plan. To ensure transparency, it should be made available to the public, along with regular updates, preferably through the city's website and the mayor's annual state of the city and budget message. A strategic plan would highlight our community's talents and strengths. And this one is an easy one. Our educational strengths and our skilled workforce are second to none. Our historic and strong position in the advanced manufacturing, scientific, finance, insurance, and IT sectors are little known but clearly apparent. Our rich and deep concentration of educational institutions and talent, our collaborative and creative reputation for successful community-based problem solving, That community-based problem solving led to our success in keeping such valuable partners as General Motors and Jackson in our region, winning the federal government's international competition to build FRIB in MSU, and creating programs to expand learning and opportunities in the business community. By engaging our business, education, community, and regional partners in a strategic planning process, innovation, collaboration, entrepreneurial solutions, and strategies will follow and lead to a better future for the city and the region. It will ensure that the mayor's challenges, it will ensure that our major challenges facing Lansing will be named, analyzed, addressed, and shared, and that citizens and stakeholders will have a say in the process. I believe citizens will rally in support of this idea because they will feel more empowered, engaged, trustful, and hopeful about government and the city's future. As Michigan's capital city, we need to be a model for how cities can survive and thrive in the 21st century. In conclusion, I strongly urge you to think creatively, to be innovative, to look at best practices, to take advantage of the university's expertise, and to assure that there are clear strategies for moving the city and the region forward. I encourage the Commission to spend the next months educating itself and the public about the art of governing in a high-risk, hyper-speed environment. Yes, we need a tune-up, but we also need to create a forum where we can think big and allow for new and creative strategies for governing effectively and efficiently. Thank you for this opportunity. I will answer any questions, and I will share with you that I have been getting prepared for this presentation, assembled files and sent to the university 47 boxes of speeches from county commissioner to labor director, and all of the documents are available at the MSU archives, and we'll make arrangements that allow any of you to search and find the source of my recommendations and how they fit in. And I'll work with you as best I can, answering questions as we go forward and clarifying how we're going to implement the strategic plan, how we'll incorporate a vision. I don't have all those answers, but I know we face big challenges, and working together, we can take on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there any questions for the mayor? Commissioner Washington.
Thank you, Mayor Hollister. This is Jody Washington. I have a question, and actually it's probably not even a charter question, but I still would like your perspective on it. What I grapple with is when it comes to regionalism, Lansing does a really good job with trying to regionalize, but unfortunately Lansing is always left behind when it comes to regionalization. Everything goes to the outlying area, and then the urban core, of course, doesn't get the attention it should get. And I'm thankful to hear you say that we are struggling, because so many people always want to talk about the pie in the sky, and that just isn't what we are dealing with. So thank you for naming it. Thank you for addressing it. But if you have any ideas where we can make sure that as we move toward regionalism, that our city does not continue to be left behind.
Well, it was a big challenge. I'd been mayor for about a year when General Motors knocked on my door and said they're politely leaving town in 5 years. Thank you very much. And I just had a knot in my stomach. I didn't know where to turn. No, I never changed the decision. This is 15,000 jobs, the best jobs in manufacturing and the industrial economy. We were a leader, and that was all at risk. But we made a promise to our partners, George Verlad at Delta, and John Deere, and all the folks around the region, chamber. It had to be a win-win. That I would not support a proposal that wasn't a win-win. And the plan we put together, the TGM committee, and all the work we did, broke new ground, had the chamber nervous. They had a traditional way of retaining business. But this was clear to me it needed something larger, and so we had to break new ground. And so we made the commitment. Win-win. It was hard. The deal fell apart at least 5 times. So you have to just be persistent, but you have to express what your goal is and get people to buy into the goal. And that requires strategic thinking and planning and long hours and many meetings and having good personal relationships, keeping your word. You have to remember that your integrity is all you got, and you got to keep your word. And even if you have to buy a compromise that you would rather not buy, Labor had to acknowledge that they had too many classifications, and the new technology was going to have fewer and fewer workers, and we had to go to the legislature and ask for a tax break on a successful auto company downsizing. That was a tough sell. But it turned out we took our workers and sent them to Germany for 2 weeks so they could learn some skills that were necessary in the new economy. And it all turned out well. But it took work and good faith.
Thank you, Mayor Hollister.
Other questions? Commissioner Bauer.
Thank you. So much want to thank Mayor Hollister for your many years of public service, 50 years, but especially the impact you made on our city, Lansing. I remember those days, and you challenged us to think big, and then we began to believe we could do things and accomplish things. And then you took the reins as the leader of the region, and made a huge difference, and we've just talked about it all, but when I think back, what would our city be like if we didn't have General Motors? Secondly, we got a second General Motors plant with a tax sharing arrangement with Delta Township, kept Jackson National, got the Lugnut Stadium. I could go on, but you, I think, instinctually did strategic planning as your recommendation here. It wasn't in the charter, but I think that I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you used goal setting and strategic planning to get us where we were, because I totally support adding this to our charter, because I think it would be not only excellent for the mayor, executive branch to do, but for our citizens to know what are the goals of our city. But Mayor Hollister, if you could talk a little bit about the way you uniquely used goal setting and a strategic plan to accomplish this.
We were very fortunate that at the time, Peter McPherson, who was president of Michigan State University, believed in local government, and he convened a forum called the Urban Policy Group. And he invited to breakfast the regional leaders. I would meet every month or every couple of months and deal with issues of economic development. He wanted to do something grandiose and explained it to the group. And I looked at him and I said, you know the Kalamazoo Street Bridge? Well, the plan was that it had to be repaired and replaced. And you had at least a dozen jurisdictions competing for the bridge. Environmentalists were wanting to protect the environment, as everybody else. Football team wants a wider bridge so people can get in and get out of the games on Saturday and the basketball games. Got Clinton County, Eaton County, Hingham County, Lansing Township, Lansing, City of East Lansing, the EPA, the Department of Natural Resources. All of them have a stake. And I said, if we can get that bridge done in 5 years and get everybody happy with it, you've got to build trust. It doesn't come automatically. You've got to work with your partners. You've got to be real. And we laughed about it. Peter agreed. And before you know it, we were negotiating to keep Jackson here quietly because of the networking that had been done leading up to the challenge that we faced. And you've got to explain to people what's going on. That's why I'm urging you to be bold, create incentives. How do you encourage a supervisor to take on his or her counsel because it's in the best interest of the region? It's tough, but if you trust, and I would always say win-win, and people kind of got to understanding that after a couple of years. And the rest speaks for itself. But you got to articulate your own vision. That's what a mayor does, and that's what the initiative I'm calling for guarantees. You're going to have to do this. And I don't know how you deal with the punishment. But the mayor's got a big job coming in, and they got a budget right away, and then he's into whatever the normal crises are, and where you know it's up election time and everything changes, so it's tough. But if you got a plan, you've articulated your plan, you've articulated your values, then you can have confidence that work can go on while the politics play itself out. And it's incredibly important that someone be held accountable. And ultimately, it's the mayor and his team. Don't do this by yourself. But you can't do that without public support. And so you've got to be explained to it. How do you explain to his first grader climate change? But it's coming. It's here. And so we need to be serious about engaging children. And when I was mayor, even though I had no legal responsibility, we initiated 24 programs, including over 50 playgrounds, shared spending, maximized dollars, use the neighborhood kids to design the playgrounds. So they were feeling ownership. Put the first playground in Baker area, let the kids design it. When they designed it, they protected. And that went unscathed for several years. So it's acting out your values, articulating your vision, getting it done.
Thank you. Commissioner Bauer, do you have anything else?
I just wanted to thank you, Mayor Hollister. And I remember that you always had 5 goals, and you were very clear to the city council, to the people, what those 5 goals were. Obviously, one was keeping General Motors, and you would say that when one was accomplished, then you could add another one. And I especially remember because I had an initiative I wanted to do badly, and that was your response, and you were totally right. You said we cannot do that right now. These are the 5. So it's a strategy that certainly works well. Again, thank you so much.
Commissioner Boyd.
Mayor Hollister, good to see you, and thank you for taking time to address our commission. I just have one quick question, and you have sent us a memo, and you've talked extensively about the need for a strategic plan. I guess I would like to know, is that your single most recommendation for this Charter Commission? Because we hear from so many people about things that have nothing to do with this commission. And one of our public speakers tonight talked about trash pickup. This Charter Commission has nothing to do with trash pickup. You know, now maybe a change in wards, maybe whatever, but trash pickup is not our thing. But from your perspective, is a strategic plan the most important thing that this Charter Commission could do to make a difference in this city? Thank you.
Yes.
And just one follow-up. You say in your memo to us that it should be a 3-year strategic plan. The mayor is elected for a 4-year term. I'm assuming you're considering that the first year would be spent working on that strategic plan and then having it in place for the following 3 years, correct?
Correct, and you regionalize it. You share it with the townships, you share it with the county, you share it with the school board, you share it with the airport, the transportation authority, even if they aren't specifically involved. You've got to bring this idea of inclusion, transparency to the fore. Those are the principles that guide it, and that's why you have the preamble. We are committed to process. We're committed to the integrity that's required to take one's faith in your partner's handshake and deliver it to the citizens in some reasonable fashion that reflects the will of the neighbors, the community.
Thank you. I have one follow-up question, Mayor, and that is this. We've had a number of public come to us and suggest that we should have a Department of Sustainability. Now, we know nationally the whole issue of global warming is kind of going sideways. We don't know where it's going, but it might be going sideways. Do you think that it's important for a city this size to have a Department of Sustainability or not?
I don't know. We need all the help we can get. We need flexibility. We need creativity. We need to build incentives. Judge department heads on how much they're linking with the programs that they operate with the schools. We have gone on record supporting, we're going to be the #1 community in America on lifelong learning. That was Michigan Works, but they got a new name for it, but it's still there, and we made that commitment. We're gonna support lifelong learning. We're gonna support a person with a skilled trade certification as much as we're going to support the grad student. But we need them both. We won the category, the FRIB, the Facility for Rare Isotope, and the competition was international. Our biggest competitor was Jefferson Labs, and the senator district was Obama's, and people didn't give us a chance in the world to win that competition. But we led with our strength. Now with our students, they had a field day. We have more engineering students than any other college in America. And those kids did all the tours. They participated in all the meetings. Had supported the university. They spoke for it. They had a contest where they built a song and a rap, bring the crib to our crib or something like that. They had a field day. And those judges, international, came around, talked to all us bigwigs, and then they saw those enthusiastic young engineers wanting to study the origin of the universe right here in Lansing, and they couldn't turn them down because we played on our strength, and our strength is our youth, but they're leaving. We got to do a better job keeping them. So I would go to the university, and we were very fortunate. We got a new president out there who comes from land-grant college, believes in community-based decision-making. They just got recognized, Michigan State, as the #1 community operated lifelong learning, experiential learning programs in America. And he got a grant with some money in it. I'd be out there meeting with him right away. I think we need to get connected to the university, like Peter McPherson. He used the urban policy group that had breakfast with him as a launching pad for several initiatives. And I would think that could be reconvened. I think we need to do something on the battery technology. I would have been on that like a hound dog on a bone. We shouldn't have seen the unfortunate collapse of agreement and the message it sent to the rest of the world. We got some work to do to make up for that. You can use this forum. Old Town was designed by 4 students from U of M. Didn't get to Michigan State when we first got there. We wanted to develop Old Town, and a couple of kids I'd worked with in the legislature from social services angle decided they're gonna feature the Old Town as their project, and we won. We won it. They were great. Use your strengths, be bold. Creativity is the coin of the realm. So be creative. Don't be afraid to ask the questions why we are doing it this way. Why can't we figure out ways to build solid relationships in Gratiot County for the new cheese factory with employing local farmers? That helps the region. We should welcome them to the new arts program, and that gets up and operationalized as an asset to our region. And use these. If you got a strategic plan, you can bring it all together. If you didn't get it this year, you'll come back at it next year. But you gotta have faith, and you gotta have fun. This is grueling work. And some days you just feel like it's hopeless. But community leader sucks it up, dusts himself off or herself, and they soldier on. And that's what I'm calling for here. Invest in the region, be a good partner, do the best you can, keep your word, and have fun. And do one good kind thing a day.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there any other questions for the mayor? Hearing none, before we close out, we have 2 proposals that the mayor submitted to the committee. One is the actual preamble suggestion. I would suggest that as a commission that we look through that, read through that, and let's bring that back maybe at our next meeting and see where we are. I think it's very comprehensive, very well thought out. I support it, but I want everyone to get on the same page, and maybe other people want to add things to it. As to the proposed amendment, the mayor is suggesting that this should go into Article 4, Section 4-102, between either point 3 or point 4, somewhere in there. We'll be addressing that hopefully later tonight. There may be, pardon me? No? No, what I said, we'll be addressing this later on tonight, and then we'll take action at some point. But it has been presented to us tonight. Usually we'll take a meeting to review things and then bring it back for consideration at that point. Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for your insight and all of the information that you've given to us. I mean, that's clearly based on years and years of experience and work. You have, committed your vocational life to the city, to the county, and to this state. And I can say that certainly we are all much better for it. And we want to give you a heartfelt thank you. So with that, we'll move on to the next presentation. We have with us Councilmember Peter Spatafor, who's the chair of the council's Audit Ad Hoc Committee. As you know, at our last meeting, we took up the article that dealt with the internal auditor, and we heard that this ad hoc committee was meeting and starting to look at that very issue. And before we wanted to get into that, we wanted to hear from the council and get your ideas and understandings and some help, maybe with some direction moving forward in that article. So, Councilmember Spatafor, I'll turn it over to you, and thank you for being here.
Sure. It's weird being on this side of the table. Can you all hear me?
We'll be kind.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you all for your service, for volunteering for this position in our city. It's the first time I've seen it happen in my 40 years of being around, and it's important work, and I thank you for the earnestness and diligence with which you're approaching the task. It's very important, and when the citizens decided to go forward with the Charter Commission, I was glad to see so many interested residents take up the charge, so thank you very much. And I also want to thank Mayor Hollister, if he's still listening, for his insight tonight, but also for so many years of service. I grew up in this area and remember Dave Hollister as the mayor, remember Dave Hollister all over the place, and I even have spent some times, maybe the nerd in me hates to admit this, but in the Hollister archives at MSU looking up some of Lansing history. So thank you to Mayor Hollister. The charge that you presented to me was pretty vague as relates to audit. So I really hope to have more of a dialogue with you about what we've done, but I'll start with the work that the Ad Hoc Committee on Audit did do. President Garza, after we secured a permanent auditor, came to me and said, before we had a committee on audit going, and then we lost our internal auditor to a different job opportunity, and that work never really completed. So now that we have another auditor, would you be willing to serve as chair of this ad hoc audit committee and put together some recommendations and help formulate an audit plan as is dictated by the charter? And you spent some time on that, so I don't need to read you the section of the charter verbatim. But I was happy to do that. I've spent 13 years in public office where we've dealt with internal and external audits. My day job, I'm currently in the middle of 4 different entities being audited externally. So I do have a little bit of understanding of audits. I would never pretend I could perform one. I can read one and participate in the process, but I think there's really some value in both external and internal audits, and I think that's exactly why the framers of our current charter listed out those 2 very specific roles. Some of them are required by general accounting standards, and some of them are nice to do. But it's good that we have both of those things in front of us. So when Council President Garza came to me in 2024, we set a calendar to meet to first have the other 2 members of the committee and myself really listen to the auditor, go over the do exactly as you did, see what the charter says the auditor should be doing. And I'm looking at a few familiar faces that sat around this table, so have worked with internal auditors before, but I think there was maybe in some ways, and I'm not speaking for anyone, but I think it's good to reframe and kind of really understand what the charge of the position is. And that's what we spent a little bit of time doing. We met October 7th, October 28th, November 18th, and December 9th. And through that process, we had several presentations on what auditing is, what it should do, how it's governed at the national association level, and how those standards are presented. And then we worked with our internal auditor to develop an audit plan for the rest of the fiscal year. We're moving into doing a more regular audit. For reasons that are numerous and complicated and nuanced, we haven't had an audit plan in quite some time. And that, I think, is a detriment to the city council as it performs its oversight duties. So having that audit plan and having a lot of the specificity that's included, I'm not here to tell you how to rewrite the audit section of the charter, but having that specificity and highlighting how important that internal audit role is for the city council, I think is very key to the legislative body performing its oversight duties of the administration. And it's important that that auditor be independent of the agencies and entities that he or she is auditing. Otherwise, I wouldn't suggest that it would create fraud or inaccuracies, but it leaves the opportunity for that type of thing to happen. So to have the auditor's duties spelled out clearly in the charter, I think is important. If you're to the point that you're asking for my opinion, I think that is important as we learn through the process what a successful audit should do. Internal audits, we for the plan, we've selected sort of the areas with the largest amount of financial transactions to go first through our audit plan, and then that'll conclude in May and June, and then we'll start over, at which time we will start a new audit plan for the following year, and we hope to keep that going. As the auditor has evolved over time and as austerity measures hit the 10th floor, staff were eliminated from this floor. And you saw the auditor taking on different roles than necessarily those internal auditing roles. And that's a neutral statement. That's just what happened. We have historically used the internal auditor in a budgetary and a legislative analysis role. And that has sort of altered the trajectory of what their yearly calendar looks like. So we viewed it, I believe, important to set that calendar so that whilst the auditor can still do those types of things, they have an overarching calendar and schedule to follow to ensure that the oversight ability of the council is preserved. So that's, I believe, what we've done over the last few months. We do have 6 meetings scheduled for the rest of the fiscal year, 27th of January, the 24th of February, the 24th of March, the 21st of April, the 19th of May, and the 23rd of June. And those are designed to have monthly check-ins as the audit plan progresses. How we report those out, I will yield to President Cost, who's in the back, I believe, still back there, as to how those will be presented to the full council on a regular basis. But there will be one comprehensive audit report done. And I think it will help us every year. The city council members are contacted by our external firm that say, and they ask us a series of questions. Are you aware of opportunities for fraud and those types of things? And during our day-to-day performance of our duties, of course, we can answer those questions, but having a complete audit report will really give us a solid ability to answer those questions and understand what we're discussing with the external auditors. So that's where we are. I'm happy to talk about the differences between external and internal audits if that would be useful. If not, I will go home and play with the dog, or if there's other questions or things you'd like to discuss, I'm yours for the evening.
Questions? Commissioner Washington.
Thank you, Councilman Spatafor, Peter. I have a couple questions. I'm very aware of audits. I've worked in audit for years. So I do know the difference between internal and external. And internal audits are incredibly important to fix things before they go to external. My question, Peter, is this. You know that in years past, the charter calls that staff is supposed to answer all of the auditor's questions, but we know that that doesn't happen. We also know that there have been times, and I don't know where you're at with it now, but they have not been given access to programs that were vital for them to do their jobs. My third thing is one auditor is not enough, and we all know it's not enough. Things are going to be overlooked. They're going to be missed. I think at one time there were five auditors. One is not enough. And not that council has anything to do with the budget, but I would highly recommend, because of the incredible seriousness of audits, that you find a way to add to that staff. And would you have any suggestions for us, perhaps, on what can be done or should be done or could be put in the charter to remedy or encourage people to do what is in the charter by answering the internal auditor?
Sure. I don't know that I have an answer for how to make that happen specifically. I do know with the current auditor and our most previous one, we did not hear of those issues. At least they weren't brought to my attention that they were having those types of issues. So I do think it is about maybe sometimes the relationships and who sits in those chairs that are being asked. And I think if you give with a plan, giving folks enough time to know these things are happening frees up the opportunity. But again, Commissioner Washington, I think you've highlighted sometimes there are those loggerhead points that are hard to break. And I don't know how you strengthen the charter to do that while maintaining a separation of powers, because the auditor doesn't really supervise the staff necessarily, but there are ways the council can, I believe, there's subpoena powers, there's things like that to really get down to the nitty-gritty, and then the external audit as well exists. I will say I wholeheartedly agree with you that one auditor is not enough. In fact, I think it's created a challenge for this council to keep an auditor, because that person works in a vacuum and in isolation and has a hard time checking his or her work, has a hard time bouncing ideas off of someone else. Try doing your jobs in isolation. And so I think that's something that maybe as we look to a budget this year, maybe we have very much put in front of Mr. Randall, our current auditor. Let us know if you think this is a job that requires more personnel. And I think he's comfortable in making that recommendation if that's which I think he'll find that to be true, but I think he's comfortable in making that recommendation should he come to that conclusion. So thank you for your question.
Commissioner Dowd.
Thank you for all your information. This is helpful. I hope a simple question, but as you went through that section of the charter and you were making a plan out of this, which kudos, that's a great step to making sure that we stick to it. As if there's not a plan, we don't do it. Were there any pieces in the charter that you felt like this doesn't happen and this is probably not relevant anymore? Or that as we're making decisions now, other areas that you think were maybe understated that need to be changed? Any verbiage in there?
You know, that's a great question, Commissioner Dowd, and it's not a simple one, despite it seeming to be, because we were approaching it as to what we had to do, not what would be nice or what we wish we didn't have to do. So I would say it seems pretty straightforward. Like there's not a lot of verbosity in this section, unlike my answers to your questions. But there are a number of things, like I don't know why the internal auditor shall review the capital improvement plan. That was a decision someone made. I don't know why that's specified as a call out in the charter. I'm not saying it should go or it should stay, but someone made that decision. And I think maybe there is, if you take a look at this and see what we've done in the past, maybe what might make sense to pull out or put something in. But I don't think as we talked to the auditor that he felt that there was anything that limited his ability to do his job in this charter, except for time and bandwidth.
Commissioner Boyd.
I have just a clarification question. So do I understand this correctly? The city has one auditor, and that auditor is responsible for both internal and external audits?
No. That's if I had led you to that belief, that was wrong.
That's right.
Yeah.
You didn't necessarily. So tell me what we have.
We have an internal auditor that is hired and reports to the city council per the charter. The city charter also requires that external audits be performed, and those external audits are done by external firms. I want to say it's Maynard Casterison right now, but it might be Plant Moran. But as I said, I'm in the middle of 4 with many firms, so I can't remember who does our external audits. But that external auditing firm is gone to bid on a regular basis, and I believe it's going to bid this year. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what's happening. And that is a firm of folks that come in and do that external audit, that spot check of, are things working well? Are they not? They also evaluate the work of the internal auditor when that work product is available.
And that external audit affects the Board of Water and Light and the LEFCU? Who does the external audit cover?
So Board of Water and Light and LEPFA are audited externally as well, and BWL also has its own internal auditor and perhaps more than one internal auditor personnel. I'm not quite familiar with that, the deep down in their hierarchy, but they have an internal auditor, and they also have an external audit that's done of their finances, which we review.
The reason I ask the question is that when I first came on the commission, I sort of had a hands-off approach to the Board of Water and Light. I'm a customer, it works great, I pay my bill, it's good. And if I lose my power, I know I'm getting it back on quickly. They do a great job. But then we had the Board of Water and Light with its rate increase, and we had people complaining about that. And it was clear to me as a commissioner, or at least it seemed clear to me, that there isn't a lot of oversight. They have a board of commissioners that's appointed by the mayor, but they seem to be kind of a yes organization, and there's never much discussion, and they tend to vote as a block in support of the administration. So I'm looking at the Board of Water and Light now saying, okay, it is a city entity, and how can we ensure that it is responsible to the people of Lansing, or the people that it serves? And that's why I ask the questions that I ask. I'm not in support. Some people on this commission and some people in the public have suggested that maybe members of the city council should be on the board. I'm not in favor of that. I don't want the city taking over the Board of Water and Light. But I do think we need to make sure that they are accountable to people. And the audit is one way to make that happen, and that's why I asked the questions I asked.
Yes, and Section or Article 3, Sub 404 does speak to the Board of Water and Light specifically being externally audited independently. And you're welcome.
And Commissioner Boyd, I'd point out in our packet, we received a communication from the Board of Water and Light that went into detail on that, and attached to that was the resolution that approved the external auditor. And what it showed was that, as was just cited, the 3-404, that section was actually, in all the requirements that are imposed on the Board of Water and Light have been met, have been reviewed and approved by the city itself, as well as the audit firms that they have. So I know I had that concern, and I've raised it. I feel comfortable with the response that we've received.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one thing. I have talked to people about auditors, and I'm told that when you hire an outside firm, basically the outside firm will give you what you want. It's not like having an auditor, McTavish, who worked for the state of Michigan, who was known for going in and finding trouble and fixing things and
bow ties.
whatever, maybe bow ties. So that the fact that there is a hiring process and that there are firms that come in, that concerns me a little bit.
I don't, if you'd like me to respond.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, it's been my experience in multiple roles, my professional day job and at this table and different ones, that they're not afraid to tell you how it is. They have lots of clients, and losing one because you give them, they don't tailor the audit to your needs. There is a management letter that goes to the board that is proofed by management, in this case would be the mayor, and that just talks about the relationship and how the audit was done. But they have strict standards as auditors and CPAs and things like that they adhere to. Is there potentially an unethical actor in that field? Absolutely, like with every field out there. But it's been my experience that external auditors really approach the job seriously with a lot of integrity and do it above reproach, because if they do gain that reputation, they won't have many clients for long.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilman Spatafora, how are you?
Good. How are you, Commissioner?
Good. Does this audit include the Housing Commission?
It does not.
Do they also have an external audit done through their board or whatever the process?
I believe it's done by HUD.
I'm sorry?
I believe HUD does the Housing Commission's audit. They're audited.
Well, they do have a lot of federal funds, but they're still part of the city. And that's why I was asking the question.
I believe also as a nonprofit, their board policy would dictate whether or not they're audited on an annual basis or whether they get financial. There's an audit light that you can do. I can't remember the term for it. That they may do annually with a more intensive audit on a regular basis. But there are there's no way they escape scrutiny with that much federal funding.
So, with all these audits, is there an audit to audit the audits?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's.
WL, then you have.
I'll point to this, but that's
Commission.
sort of where the city council comes in.
Or is that what you do?
That's kind of what the city council comes in, or the board that you sit, the school board.
Sure.
The auditor, the internal auditor will produce audit reports that the auditors may use to help inform their reports, and then those reports are given generally in a public setting. Well, they're for sure put on public record in front of the city council or the governing body of the entity. And so I guess to the extent that there's an audit of the audits, it's done by folks like you and me that are familiar with our organizations, but not necessarily our auditors. So we hold, as city council members, the administration accountable to the contents of those audits.
Yeah. So
There, as an example, there's been findings in our audit on a regular basis, and the exact terminology escapes me, but there have been late journal entries to our budget on a regular basis, and they've been findings that our auditing firm has found. And a year ago, I looked at the finance director and said, I don't want to see these findings. And they worked diligently to implement a new finance system to try and mitigate that. And I believe we're going to still see the findings again, but I'm told this is the last year because the finance. So it was one of those, you can go back to the tape, and several members at the dais, not just me, said, why do we keep getting this? And the answer was given as to why. It wasn't fraud, it wasn't negligence, it was just a finding. And you work to fix those findings, you work to get those qualifications off your audit. And that's where a governance body comes in to make sure that those audits are, one, read, and two, understood, and then three, reflected upon to make changes where those are necessary.
yeah. So I guess in general, you council does get copies of at least the findings of each of the audits, or not?
Yes,
Or-
absolutely.
Okay.
We are given we are given directly the audit by the auditing firm. They are chosen by, if I'm remembering, by city council through a competitive process. We appoint them to do the audits, and those audits come directly to us. They come through Sherry, but everything comes through Sherry. But
Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner.
I know Commissioner Lopez brought up the Housing Commission, but are our quasi-government entities like DLI and the LADC, are they included in our internal audit?
that's a great question, Commissioner Anderson, and I'm going to punt it because I don't know that we've done an audit plan in so long. Right now, the plan goes through police, fire, public service, parks and rec, and then others. So the others is where we're going to kind of flesh out what that looks like. We're trying to get a lot done in a short period of time to satisfy the charter requirement. We may end up kicking that into FY26 in June of 25. Or I'm sorry, excuse me, July of 25. I don't know, but my assumption is those will be audited because they are cost centers and they are agencies that are part of the city budget. So
Right.
I believe they will be.
Okay.
It's just not specifically in our audit plan right now because of the timing that we've had.
Cool, thank you.
Of course.
Commissioner Bauer?
You know, it's obvious that the internal audit function is probably one of the most important tools the city council has in their role and responsibility in oversight of the entire city and of the executive branch. So it does concern me when I look back over the years, you know, when we haven't had a city, internal auditor. I think that as a commission, we need to, this is a section of the charter. I don't know what we would do with it, but I think we need to be very aware that it's such an important function because that's where would you agree with me in terms of being a tool to really evaluate what's going on? And that's what the people of this city think somebody should be doing.
Well, I've made a habit not to disagree with Joan Bauer, but I do agree with you very specifically on this instance that this is one of the most important tools we have, and it has been underutilized and I think underinvested in. Through there was a recession that hit this city like no other. I mean, you all know this is not a criticism, and I've been part of this organization for 7 years, right? Like, we need to, I think, now that we have an auditor in place, we really did empower him to tell us what he needs to do his job, and I think it's more personnel. But I do, if you're asking my opinion about the importance in the charter, which I think you might be, it should be there and it should be highlighted as an important and key function of the city council's oversight.
Other questions?
Well, and obviously, perhaps we need to be sure this section of the charter's enforced because or followed, I should say.
Well, just a couple of questions that I have, Councilmember, and this is to follow up on what a lot of people have already talked about, and I think you have as well. You know, when you look through the charter provisions, almost every one of the provisions has shall do something. It's mandatory. You know, if you would go through with your auditor, or your internal auditor at this point, and say, hey, are you doing this? Are you doing that? Are you doing this? I think most of them are not being done. And maybe I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I remember when I was on council, and I think this is when Commissioner Bauer was on council, there were 5 or 6 people, and I think Jody has talked about that, that were in the auditor's office, that it took that many people to do that amount of work. And so I guess what I'd ask you to do is to go through with your committee and see if this is all still accurate. I mean, if we're saying something has to be done, then it's got to get done. And if it's not, then is that an issue that we need more personnel, or whatever the reason is? And in that regard, I have seen in other charters that where the city believes that this is such an important work that has to get done, and it's an important position in the charter, they will actually put funding levels in the charter and say that, you know, this will, there'll be, so many positions created, and they'll protect it from budget cuts and stuff like that. Is that something you'd recommend?
If you're asking me, yes. I think that, and knowing that other cities can do that, I would highly recommend a minimum staffing level for the internal auditor's office to make sure that's done. Because I'll tell you, Mr. Chair, when we went through this, it's been quite some time since some of these things were checked off due to vacancies in the position or just other priorities taking, the fire of the day. That kind of stuff happens. And I think bandwidth is an issue for our auditor, and I think if the Charter Commission has the ability to strengthen that office, I think that it's an important office to look to.
I would ask the committee if you could sit down and think about and talk with your internal auditor what that minimum staffing level would look like. That would help us, I think. At least we can talk about that. Commissioner Washington.
Just a comment, if you have more than one, which I can't believe that was ever approved, it would also do away with the problem of having no auditor for long periods of time.
Yep, excellent point.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none. Councilmember Spatafor, thank you so much for spending time. Go home, be with your dog.
Thank you. Yes, I will. You all have a great evening, and thank you.
Okay. Now going to old business. Back to Article 2 for our line-by-line review. We do have some information that's presented to us by our attorney. There were a number of issues raised and reviewed by our attorneys with recommendations to be made. I would remind the commission that there is a cheat sheet that Emery has provided us that goes through each one of the articles and points out what is left to be done, what we have done. And I think we'd use that as a guide to go through this evening's work. So I guess I'll turn this over to Kristen, and if you could talk about the recommendations that you're making. I think this follows the cheat sheet that we have here, and we can work off of that.
Thank you. So there is a memo in your packet. It starts page 18 of 52 on 3 sections of Article 2 that were sort of left open based on your discussions at the prior, I think it's 2 meetings now. So the first one is 2-103, ineligibility for office. And really just the commission was having a lot of discussions on getting very clear on what that meant, and in particular, what that meant in terms of tax liability. So based on the conversation, particularly at the last meeting, we did put in some recommendations. First, to define default to the city, There was conversation about there's actually multiple counties that this could affect. So the definition to include default to the city includes failure to pay property taxes for property located in the city, regardless whether the tax liability is owed to the city or the county. Not specifying which county. It would be obvious based on the particular parcel. But then when we look at point 2 regarding the eligibility to hold office, there's sort of 2 points that were discussed. First is making clear that means at any time, whether that's at candidacy level or while you're holding office. But then also there was a concern about, well, what if this is a situation where an individual, there's a notice issue. If we're defining this as any fine and they didn't know they had a parking ticket, what can we do? So on it's on page 19 of 52. We did provide what we think is some language for you to look at that hopefully addresses both concerns, but obviously subject to your guys' discussion, revision, things like that. But to say that no person shall be eligible to hold any city office at any time, such person is in default to the city unless such default is eliminated within 30 days after written notice thereof by the city clerk. Again, to give that opportunity for the individual to have this notice of this is what is the issue, fix it, or we're gonna have to, move forward with either saying you can't move forward with, you're ineligible to be on the ballot, or move forward with forfeiture removal issues if it's a current officer. Do you want me to continue to go on to the next section, or do you want to talk about this one?
Let's just talk about this
Okay.
for right at this moment. Are there any questions regarding either the definition of default to the city or to the proposed amendment to 103.2? Commissioner Dowd.
One question for the clerk. So this puts the responsibility on the clerk to notify. This is more than just a council or a ballot, right, or somebody running. So if there's somebody that's holding an office anywhere in the city, would you get that notice already?
I would not receive notice of that at this time unless it was brought to my attention. I suppose there could be a mechanism for that to occur.
Okay. I'm just concerned that could fall through easily if the responsibility is your office and you're not receiving that notice.
I have a couple of questions. First, with regards to default to the city, you have in the second sentence, this includes but is not limited to failure to pay any monetary obligation, including taxes, fees, or fines, and then it goes on to talk about property taxes. When you say including taxes, would that be the income tax to the city as well?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so if we were to adopt this, we would have to go back to the definition section, amend that to include that in the definition, correct?
You can either go back and define default to the city in the definition section in Article 1, or you can be specific to put it in this section here as sort of a specific definition for this article. If you put it in the definition section, that would then be a definition that would likely cover any time that the phrase default to the city comes up anywhere else in the charter, although off the top of my head, I don't know that it comes up anywhere else. So yeah, and I guess one point, based on conversation here, I suppose the default to the city, gets back to the definition of officer, and what that means to, if we need to be clear that that's just elected office, or is this elected appointed office, boards, commissions, things like that. I don't know if that's something that needs to be further clarified in point 2, or just leave it broad and then it's going to apply to anyone.
City office, so
Yeah.
that would include everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. I did, just one follow-up question, and this is the point that Commissioner Dowd raises. How do we ensure that notice is going to be provided, or that there's some way to get this information? I mean, I don't know how the city clerk would know if, there was a outstanding parking ticket or fines and costs that were not paid on a matter before the 54A district court. How do we ensure that information has become available? I think that's the problem we've had in the past, that this would come up as an issue, but it would resolve itself before anyone found out about it. And so is there a different way, a different mechanism that we could use to make sure that the clerk, or for example, if, you have the assessor that has a tax bill out there, do we say that they have to notify the clerk, or how are we going to get this information?
So I think it depends on who we're talking about. Certainly when you're talking about, candidacy to run for an office, for example, that's sort of a point in time where you can then do a search of things to see if there's any issues. But when person is, holding the office currently, you do have the issue of, well, is this every year someone's going to do a search of these things to find out? I think the other, issue as well, and I think this comes into the discussion of, notice and the ability to remedy. If someone's late on a parking ticket for whatever reason and then pays it off, is that really something that you want to disqualify them from an office? Practically, what I've seen before in circumstances where it involves, for example, employment, where there may be you need to run their driving record because they drive for a city or something like that. There may need to be internal protocol to, okay, every year we're gonna, do a search of 54 or of the district court, or of any outstanding parking tickets, things like that.
Let me ask the clerk, what do you do now if someone files for candidacy? Do you do a background check?
We do not at the time of filing of candidacy. It's been determined that the default applies to holding office, not running for office under the current charter. So that is something that we look at after the election of the people who were elected.
And then how do you do that background check?
We contact the treasurer to make sure that, and
So
that
this is
we
just-
we have not ever done a district court check or a parking ticket check, or,
I'm not worried about
garbage
parking
collection,
tickets, but,
fee,
there's other things out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Boyd.
I think when it comes to campaign finance, the candidate has to file a report and sign an affidavit that they are in compliance with campaign finance law. It would seem to me that maybe that is the answer here, that somehow they have to affirmatively say that they do not owe any money to anybody in order to be a candidate or to be an office holder. So that would be my first comment. My second comment goes to page 19 of 52, where we talk about no person shall be eligible to hold any city office at any time such person is in default to the city, unless such default is eliminated within 30 days after written notice thereof by the city clerk, with all due respect. I've listened to people in other communities who are dealing with an issue right now of a person who was elected, who's not taking office. But the point being, there's nothing in this language that talks about the 30 days for the clerk. In other words, it says 30 days after written notice by the city clerk, but it doesn't say when the city clerk has to send that notice. So I don't think this is sufficient. I don't know, I don't have the answer to it, but it's not sufficient the way it is. Maybe the clerk has to say within so many days, or I don't know the answer, but I'm just saying I don't think this is sufficient. Thank you.
Vice President.
Wouldn't you have to designate someone first to do that recommendation to the clerk? For instance, the treasurer or the assessor? Or would that be a responsibility of your office? Take on that responsibility, because obviously it's not done, so.
That's a little bit unclear. And currently, to Commissioner Boyd's overlapping point, we do require a candidate to sign an affidavit that says, before taking office, I will not be in default and I will be eligible to take office. And then before taking office, we have them file an additional one that says, I am not in default. So they do affirm that, but they're also 4-year terms. And there's,
One after the fact.
although City Council has implemented 4 council members, because that's who they have the authority to regulate, they have a council rule that council members must annually file an affidavit that they are not in default and various other things of eligibility. So that could be implemented more broadly through the charter. Is one solution, is to do an annual affidavit. And
Would that be something that the commission wants to look at in terms of including that language in 103.2? All right, could we get something on? I think if the council rule.
I can get Attorney Riwa as well as the commission
Okay.
that council rule, and that might be a good starting point.
Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Washington.
Chairman Jeffries, I just want clarification from you. Eliminated within 30 days after written notice, is there no personal accountability for crying out
I'm
loud?
not saying I'm
I know if
into
I
that.
have tickets, I always checked my 54A district court.
I agree.
I don't think we should have to babysit
I agree.
elected officials or people running. I mean, trust me, there's enough people out there checking everybody. You're gonna find out. So this just kind of grates me the wrong way, like we're holding their hand and, oops, we found this. They know they have it. They know they have it. So I'm just saying, I don't like this.
Okay. Other points, comments? Commissioner Dowd.
I just wonder if a simple solution to that, because I agree with you, but I wonder if to have some sort of checks and balances once a notice has been served. So within 30 days of a notice of a violation, so it's not up to the clerk to notice. If then somebody is aware that they have been served 60 days ago with a notice of default and they haven't cleared it, then they could be eligible for forfeiture. So maybe it's within 30 days of being notified of a default, and it removes the clerk completely from that.
Why don't we bring back some more language at our next meeting? You've heard the concerns here. Maybe 30 should be reduced to 15 or something like that. Or eliminated. All right, we'll bring it back. But as to the definition of default to the city, I would suggest that we put it in the definition section so it's as broad as possible. So I think a motion to amend Article 1, Chapter 2, Section 205 as adopted to include this definition of default to the city would be in order. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved and supported. Is there any comments? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It's adopted unanimously. Okay. Section 2302.
Okay, removal and or forfeiture and removal from office. There was some discussion about what really that last sentence means, and specifically whether to, I guess, be specific about what participation means for a council member that is facing a removal hearing. So my recommendation is to consider that perhaps the participation does not mean just voting on the resolution, but actually participating as a council member. So certainly that there would be a due process ability and right to be present, to hear the evidence, to speak, but you may want to consider that means sitting at one of these tables, not at the dais. So what the language in here states is it's permitted to attend and speak at the hearing, but may not participate in the hearing as a council member or vote on the resolution, which I think is consistent with generally how conflict of interest type situations are. So typically when there is an actual conflict of interest, a council member of any board is technically not supposed to be in the room. You're supposed to get up and leave, which in a situation like this where there's a due process right to sort of hear and sort of defend yourself, you want to be able to provide that leverage but not have a situation where the person is also sitting up here and kind of arguing with the board for their own seat. So that's kind of the rationale of the recommendation for this language.
Any comments or questions? Anybody want to make the motion? I'll make the motion. It's been moved by Commissioner Dow to include the proposed amendment, and this will be adopted as it appears in the memo. And the red line verbiage is what is being added to this section. Is there any other comments or debate? Commissioner Lopez?
Yes, should there be any kind of timeline within there?
I guess I'd be open to, I guess, what do you think in terms of what needs to be a timeline? I think it's appropriate to leave it in. For due process purposes, you really just need meaningful notice and opportunity to be heard. So, and that doesn't need to be a whole lot of time. It's certainly your prerogative. You could put in a timeline if you wanted to. Otherwise, that could always be established by rule. City council could establish that as a sort of a bylaw as to to flesh out this procedure a little more.
Well, I guess that's the point. If somebody gets into this kind of a situation, at what point, is the person notified and so on and so forth? When does it start? Or are we saying that somebody else will put together the steps or the procedure for this to be enforced?
So I think it could be, it could be either. I mean, if you wanted to get to the point of actually elaborating what the process is in the charter, you certainly could look at doing that. Of course, it's a lot more difficult to change. So if the council finds that there maybe is a better way to do it, you'd have to submit it to a charter amendment to change
Maybe
it.
some direction, if not, how, but what would be some basic direction?
Council rules.
And that's certainly something that you could look at adding language into here if there's, more direction in terms of timeframes and things you want to give.
Commissioner Washington?
That I do believe, I was just side chatting, which is not appropriate. Sorry about that. But I do believe that's something that the council could put in their council rules, and then it's not a charter issue, and it can be changed without an amendment going to the people. As far as the timeline goes, that's what you're looking at, right?
Well, I don't know. It is a charter issue because it's here.
Well, we can put this in here, but
but
it's
the
for the
process.
specifics, the process, that can go into council rules.
Well, I don't know. I guess.
I'm just hesitant to put something too specific in the charter because with what we voted on last week, there's not going to be a lot of opportunity to have this charter looked at again. So I think we have to be really careful because a lot of what we do is going to be written in stone. And I just think it's easier if you put it in the rules.
I guess it depends who the council is and the composition of the council and what kind of rules they put together. It could change from year to year. I mean, that's good or bad, I don't know. I just bring it up because there is no basic, timeline of anything. But if that is what the council rules would take care of, then we may have that understanding.
Right, I mean, at a minimum, the council bylaws could take care of that. They could also establish it by an ordinance, which, has a little more of a process to make it a little more concrete. At the very least, this would be a public meeting, so there would be minimum notice, there would be minimum timeframes under the Open Meetings Act. If they were to call a special meeting, it'd have to at least be 18 hours. Likely it would be longer because this would probably be a pretty big issue that would take a little bit more time, practically speaking. But at a very minimum, it would be at least 18 hours.
Commissioner Kui?
Do we know, do the council personally right now, have they, because I know there was an issue with someone not wanting to leave when this was addressed before. So has city council already tightened that language to address that?
I have the rules here, and I did not find anything related to that.
That being said, then maybe Commissioner Lopez does have a point, that maybe we should put some more teeth to tighten that up.
Commissioner Lopez?
Yeah, from previous experiences, we find that council couldn't do anything at the end of the day. And maybe they didn't want to do anything. But then again, that's what I'm talking about, that how do we empower council to do, and not find ways of not enforcing charter provisions.
Commissioner Washington.
They already have the tools. The charter gives them the tools. There's a difference of having them have the tools and them not using the tools. They have a lot of authority. They have a lot of power. Unfortunately, councils don't want to be unpopular, and nobody wants to make the hard calls. So they have the tools that they need already. They just need to use them. And they need to educate themselves on what those tools are.
Any other comments?
So we can charge them for not doing anything, not doing their duty, right?
I do want to clarify too, just looking at the language, it does say that the notice, when there is a public hearing before the council, it has to be with notice published in the same manner as notice of proposed ordinances. So it would have to, they would have to, publish this and do it with a sufficient amount of time in the similar manner that a proposed ordinance would be put out to the public and to the accused commissioner. So there would be a little more time than that very minimum 18 hours for a special meeting.
Well, just so to clarify, Commissioner Lopez, are you talking about notice that's given to the individual and to the public about this, or are you talking about just notice that that we've got something here that we're going to pursue? So, for example, say a violation occurs on December 1st, and everybody knows about it, and, are you saying then that notice of forfeiture and all the proceedings that should occur must be given within a certain period of time to that individual? Or are you saying when the notice is given, then there's so much time that before the hearing is held?
Well, I was thinking that you have to start somewhere.
Right.
Give notice to the individual, right?
Right.
And is there a timeline for that?
Right.
From
Well,
the time
so
that you found that there was probable cause or something like that?
Yeah, if there was an issue that developed.
Right.
And council's going to take the position, we're going to do nothing about it, or we're going to do something about it. So are you saying once that issue
once
comes
notice is given,
forward, then you have so much time before council has to make an affirmative decision? Yes?
Right, yeah, because that's what I'm talking about, council to act
Okay,
or not act.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So what
once
would be,
given notice,
what would be that reasonable time for you, in your mind?
I don't know, maybe within 30 days or something like that.
What do you all think?
I mean, we have an attorney here, maybe that could have a better,
I'm just hesitant because this is going to be forever, and it's going to be difficult to change. So I'm hesitant to put that on the council, because you don't know, you might have heard about it over here, but then something else comes up over here, and then you find out the culmination, and
but we're not talking about gossip, we're talking about actual
notice.
things, notice. Once the notice is given.
Yeah. Y'all vote the way you want. I'm going to vote no.
Well, it's an interesting point when as everybody has talked about, when council knows something and they choose not to act on it. And, we found that frustration going through a number of provisions in this charter. So how do you encourage or force council to do something? And a notice provision, you've got to do something, use it or lose it. And again, to try to encourage them to do something, is there some other way that we might do that?
I don't know that a lot of people have the stomach to do anything when there are accusations. You have the ethics board, and typically the ethics board, in my experience, doesn't ever really find anybody, lacking. So, so you have the ethics board, and then it comes to council, and then it disappears, and that's only if the clerk wants to send it on to the ethics board. And there's so many things that are lacking in this. And then in the situation that I did talk about, nobody ever just brought it up. They just did a silly resolution. And So is that what you're talking about here? We're not going to do anything because doing a resolution saying somebody should leave, that's an inaction. It has no teeth. So I guess maybe this is, I mean, if we're serious about this, maybe this is something we should think about. I don't know. Because we have not had councils with the teeth to really use the tools they have.
Well, I guess that's what we're here for. You know, and to change some things.
Oh, I don't want to say that. Maybe I'm being convinced, but okay.
Madam Vice Chair.
I just want to comment that with my 12 experience on the ethics board, I realized we made recommendations to enforce things, but that board doesn't have any teeth. Once those recommendations were made, nothing came of those recommendations. So that's my experience.
Strength of the ethics board.
You're talking about a time period. All right.
Not only the time frame, but also putting the language to pretty much force them to act on it. So they don't sit on that. Either they're going to act either way. Either you're going to...
Take an affirmative or negative position. That would be good.
Absolutely.
So can we do that?
Do what? What are we talking about here? I hear a lot. I hear a lot of different
I need you to
things.
look at this and to put a time frame in there that a decision has to be made by, and that there has to be a decision made, either affirmative or negative. An action has to be taken by council.
I want to caution you against that for a few reasons. First of all, and I think this came up a little bit, it depends on the nature of the reason for the removal. And it could be because facts are developing, and so who knows what when. So when did the Flint water crisis become the Flint water crisis? When does an allegation of sexual harassment become something where it's, okay, now you have reasonable cause to act, or it's one person, but now you have 12 people saying, yeah, me too. So it, depending on the situation, you may not want to do that. If I were the lawyer for the council member under review, I would say, go as early back as far as I can, and then say, council, you didn't act within the 30 days the charter said, therefore you now lack the power to kick me out. So you could be having an adverse consequence on what you want to empower your board to do. The other thing too is it does say may remove, so there could be a situation where it could, they may choose not to act for whatever reason, and I think you want to think about the council is elected to fill in the board, to fill that position and to do that job, and if it's a discretionary action, that means the decision not to act, and that could be just not taking any action, including not making an affirmative vote not to act. But we can certainly look at that, but I think those are some of the concerns I have in my head about how this would play out in actuality. So I guess if you want me to look at some, I can look and do some survey of some other charters to see if they actually have some deadlines put in there, and I can bring that back to you for your review if that's what you want.
Commissioner Lopez.
Yes, I think, to clarify, I think that the 30-day notice or whatever notice is given after due process of any allegation. For example, you mentioned sexual harassment. Somebody's accused of sexual harassment. They go through the process of investigation and fact-finding and come up with a finding. If they found probable cause for that to be true, or they found that the person was, in fact, violating the sexual harassment policy of the city, that then the council, if they thought that that was grounds for forfeiture, that the clock would start there, not when the innuendos were going on, but once an investigation is done and this is the result.
Okay, so I guess my question is, when we're talking about the timeline, are we talking about the council as essentially the prosecutor, or the council as the judge? Because you're both, or the city council is both. They decide to bring the charge, and then part of that charge is itself the due process that's provided in 2-302. So do you want that 30-day time frame to be the decision to bring the public hearing, or it's once a public hearing is held, you have X amount of days to render your decision, or both.
Well, you're my attorney. What do you recommend?
But I'm not an elected official. I want to make sure I'm getting guidance from you.
No, but it becomes a case, right? So what would be proper in this case, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's what you can do and what you ought to do, what you're allowed to do. I think less is more in terms of some of these deadlines and things for the reasons I've said. But I mean, I can certainly look at some more, do a little more of a thorough review of whether there are actually any deadlines in some of these other charters. But I would leave it open-ended because you're electing the council to do that job. And if they're not, then you vote them out. I mean, that's the remedy if they're not doing the job. And again, I have concerns about actually limiting their discretion and being able to act by putting some of these things in. The other thing you can do too is if you want to actually force, for lack of a better word, a process that the city council imposes, is you could put a statement in here, city council shall implement, rules of procedure, by ordinance or by bylaw, to actually put something in here of, we expect you to put a process in place. That's certainly something you could do. And then it allows an opportunity for it to change, because you may find there may be a better process or needs to be tweaked based on experience.
Well, and I think that they should take in consideration what's already existing. And how does that work at City Hall versus City Council? And of course, we're talking about council members. We're not talking about an employee.
Right.
But council members are still covered by certain, ordinances of the city. So my thought is that at certain point in time, some notice has to be given, maybe to schedule the hearing, which may be the first step of the city council, I don't know. But that would be an example.
Madam Vice Chair.
Yes, my concern with creating this timeline is that if I make an accusation of sexual harassment, then there has to be a fact-finding period. And you don't know how long that's going to take. But if you're suggesting once that the evidence has been presented that someone did sexually harass me, then the time frame begins after that. But investigations, there's no timeline for an investigation.
No, and I'm
Okay.
sure of that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't tie ourselves in.
So you do it after you have,
like the
Yeah,
evidence.
You're holding
Well-
something that you're considering
Right.
forfeiture.
You found enough
Because
evidence.
of-
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
I had a couple of questions, and it's in 302.1. It starts off by talking about council shall declare the forfeiture of the office of any elective officer or appointee. And then it says, and may remove for cause any person appointed to an office for a fixed term. So on the shall portion, is that governed then by point 2, where it talks about an elective officer or appointee shall be forfeited if he, she does A through C? Or does that include additional acts?
Well, I think it could be, so I think declaring forfeit could also be the section above about being absent, because it's after 60 days have lapsed, it shall be forfeited at the close of the meeting. So that's one example where it's okay, it's forfeit. So I think that is a situation that it would apply, but I think it could be also the point, what's in point 2. So, yeah.
So what are the then may remove for cause what are the causes? I mean, what's the?
So I think part of it would be the failure to appear, having not showed up to the meeting as stated in there's not a point 1, it's the paragraph before point 1. But then also lacking qualifications. So if, for example, they move out of the city and then they don't resign voluntarily, convicted of a felony while holding office, and then violating a provision punishable by forfeiture, which I would have to do a term search to see if there were other, I don't recall if there's any other statements in here that make you eligible for forfeiture, other than what's in this section
Yeah,
here.
but those are, I thought those were the activities or the behavior that would get you the mandatory shall.
It's a shall be forfeited, but there is still a removal from office process. And then removal for cause. I don't know that it's actually been defined what cause
It
means
hasn't
in
been.
here specifically.
And it
So that is something that you could
And then
state
it says,
further.
for a person appointed to an office for a fixed term. Is that different than the elective officer or appointee? Are they addressing two groups of different groups of people?
Where are we? Fixed term.
It's after removal for cause.
Hold on, one more page.
I mean, I think they're two separate groups of people.
Yeah, well, appointed to office for a fixed term. Yeah, it would be. Not elected. Which I don't know how many people in the city are functionally elected to a fixed term, unless you're talking about people that may be appointed to an elected office until the next election. Well, okay, boards and commissions is another option. So you could have something stated in one of the ordinances that specific to one of those boards that could make them eligible for a forfeiture provision.
I guess what I'm looking for is to kind of get it cleaned up, so when we read it, you know, that this group of folks, if you're an elective officer or appointee, yeah, it's a shall, it's a mandatory forfeiture based on 2A through C, if I'm reading it correctly. And then there's the second group, any person appointed to an office has to have reasonable cause or cause, and that should be defined.
Okay.
I mean,
I think one concern is even if it's declared forfeit, there may still need to be a hearing, essentially like a name clearing hearing, just to make
Right,
sure that the
but they
facts
have-
are there.
Again.
But yeah,
they
it's
should-
a little different than.
I mean, that may be
for
the
cause.
point where council says, we're forfeiting your office. I mean, they take a position, it doesn't mean that you are, but you have to then go through that process.
Okay.
And so that would start the time. Anyway, I don't know. I think we're beating a dead horse here. Commissioner Washington.
I'm just a little confused. You say, that's when they say, you know, this is forfeiture, they don't have to leave until after the hearing?
I think
they should be on
everything is
leave.
subject to the hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't you think they should, like, maybe be on administrative leave or something until then? Depending on the severity of
I
the
don't know.
accusation?
Can you do that to an elected official?
It's an elected official, you can't.
Oh.
Until the, I mean, because they're elected.
Too bad. Too bad.
All right, other questions, comments? We'll leave you to your work. Oh,
What actually have we decided on that we're looking for? Huh?
there was no, I don't believe there was a motion.
No.
I think we're asking to have this, this particular section reworked to further define how this is going to work, what is a forfeiture, what's a mandatory forfeiture for officers or appointees, what's the definition of cause, and what are the other groups that it covers. And then maybe that might get us to a point where we can talk about establishing a time for the process. Is everybody on board with that? Okay. Commissioner Anderson.
So I just want some clarification. Department directors are hired by the mayor for a fixed term of a year, correct? Or
That, I don't know the answer to that. There are at-will employees that could be directors that are the one-year contracts that you're talking about. Are there other employees that are for cause? Any directors that are for cause employees?
I don't believe so, and I'm not sure, that might be a legal question as to whether having an annual contract makes it a fixed term. I'm not.
They served at the pleasure.
Right, they're at-will employees.
Yeah, I thought they served at the pleasure of the mayor.
But they do have an annual contract.
But they do have a term. I mean, and that was, I think,
But
actually.
But it's not like something that ends. I mean, if they're a month late on renewing it, it's not like they're out of office.
Right.
It's not like they go away, so.
So do they, I know they serve at the pleasure of the mayor, but they don't report to HR in the same capacity as other staff, correct?
Pretty much, I think they do.
Okay.
They're subject to the human resources rules that we have.
Okay. So like, what about the human resources director? Who holds the human resources director accountable?
That would be the mayor.
The mayor.
Okay. And then if he doesn't do anything, then there's just nothing. Like, if the human resources director was being accused of sexual assault, for example, then the mayor just decides whether to investigate or handle or not. Is that?
That's more of an employment issue than
Okay.
than holding elected officials accountable for
Yeah.
root causes.
So I'm just trying to understand the process and just making sure that there's accountability for those folks as well. So that's all.
I think in Article 4, there's some discussion about that I think might be more pointed to what you're looking for. Okay. Special elections?
All right, special elections. This was the section we were asked to look at whether the deadlines conform to current Michigan election law. In short, they don't, particularly for really all of it. So, and what's a little bit difficult is there's actually a little bit of inconsistency with state law between what the Home Rule Cities Act states and what Michigan election law states. But at the end of the day, in terms of what the process is, Michigan election law is going to control process on that. So as we've stated, what we looked at primarily was Michigan election law, and particularly MCL 168646A. Typically speaking, ballot wording has to be certified within so many days before the election. And so based on that, and I go into a little more detail stated in the memo here, it's going to be about 84 days, or it's 12, I think it's 12 Tuesdays before the election, 12th Tuesday before the election, which is can be 84 days, it may be longer. But based on that, we put in a recommendation that we're talking about special elections. They'll be held when called by the resolution of the City Council at least 90 days in advance of the election or longer as otherwise required by this charter or state law, which to the extent for some reason it needs to be longer than the 90 days, either based on a calculation specific to that time or something changes in state law, there's an out for that. So that's in 2-406.1. But then in point 2, the current charter states that there needs to be a special election, a special primary at least 25 days before an election to fill a vacancy. But Michigan election law says that that primary has to happen 45 days before, so we changed that date as well. And again, putting in that general or longer as otherwise required by state law to provide the ability to make it clear that we do have to comply with Michigan election law for this.
Any questions or comments on this? Anybody like to move the amendments to 2.406.1? And can we take them up both at the same time, point 2? Commissioner Boyd.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in the event our mayor is no longer the mayor, for whatever reason, and the city council president becomes the mayor under our current whatever, I don't know if that's the charter or the law or whatever.
The charter.
I think it's the charter. Okay, so are you saying then we have to have a special election to elect a mayor? Or it was my understanding that the city council president serves as the mayor until the end of the term, and then, so I guess I'm not clear.
So I think you have to read those both together, because I believe that that section provides whether it completes, assuming that they sit in that situation. Let me find where that's stated.
So I'm looking at point 4. It says, whenever a vacancy in the office of mayor, city clerk, or city council exists for 30 days and the city council has failed to fill the vacancy.
Failed to fill the vacancy.
Well, that generally doesn't happen in Lansing because it's automatic. I mean, the council president becomes the mayor.
But they could also decline. So the provision that covers that states that first it goes, the option, if the mayor resigns or whatever, first option is it goes to the president. If the president doesn't have to accept the office. If they don't, then the council can select. And if they don't select, then it goes to the election commission to decide, okay, we need to have a special election to pick. Okay. So section point 4 is actually not changed at all. This is already existing in the charter. And I think it's sort of accounting for the parade of horribles, being your entire board resigns, because that's happened before.
I bet.
And if you don't state it here, state law will provide what the procedure is, because there's always going to be a procedure, because you always got to have some way to try to get to quorum, and to have those seats elected. And if this provision, point 4, isn't stated, Michigan election law will apply, and that's the county election board is going to set what that election is. And just to be clear, special election is defined in Michigan election law to be, you can only have it in May, August, or November for this type of thing.
Right.
But this is one of those things where you kind of want to think of all the contingencies, and if the city doesn't provide how they're going to deal with the parade of horrible, state law does, and it's going to the county is going to establish the county election board will establish the election and the procedure.
And your recommendations follow along with election law?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm obviously open, if someone else believes that it's incorrect, happy to hear it, and willing to look at it. But yeah, based on our research, I do believe that complies with Michigan election law.
Other questions? Hearing none, a motion be in order to adopt, let's do it separately, 2-406.1, the language or longer as otherwise, and the 90-day provision.
So moved.
It's been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Does pass unanimously. And then 2.406.2, language, the 45-day requirement. Is there a motion to approve? It's been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, does pass. So, we're done tonight with Article 2. Oh, just by the way, it's an FYI, with the 84-day requirement to get stuff on the ballot, we have to have, if we want to get on the November ballot for this year, our work, including the review by the governor and by the attorney general, that has to all occur prior to probably the second week of August. So we're pushing up against some deadlines here. Commissioner Washington?
Should we not be where we hope to be, are you opposed to scheduling more meetings? Okay, thank you.
What everybody wants?
I would rather that than to just rush through it because we have this deadline. I want to make sure we're very thorough.
We haven't been rushing.
I have two
Commissioner
questions.
Boyd.
I have two questions.
Sure.
First of all, have we contacted the governor's office or the AG's office to ask what their timetable would be? I mean, how much time are they going to need? Are they going to need 6 months, or are they going to be able to turn it around in 2 weeks?
They have said, I think in the stuff that was given to us from the Michigan Municipal League, it was up to 3 months. But then I read that they're doing it in 1 to 2 months.
So at a minimum, a month, which means
that
a
would
minimum, you'd have to have it all in a nice package and on their desk 1st of July. in order to accommodate what we just approved,
I
right?
think so, but we should, I think there will be a reach out. I mean, the recommendation from the league was to have the lawyers reach out to the AG and the governor's office to prepare them, let them know it's coming, let them know if there's any issues that might come up, so everybody's on the same page.
My second question kind of goes to what Commissioner Washington was saying. In terms of other meetings, I don't have a problem with other meetings. I don't know, I can't speak for the rest of you, but I don't have a problem with it. But we're just getting through Article 2. We have to go through Article 3. You have on the agenda Article 4. I have a lot of changes in Article 4. And so this meeting that we're in is probably going to go long. And so I'm just wondering if we shouldn't be thinking about an alternative meeting schedule now so that we can avoid going in late into the evening, because quite frankly, I do my best work in the morning. Late nights are not my best time for me to be thinking. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, whatever, but, you know, if anybody, we send a memo out, let's get, you know, some ideas, and if we can always amend the schedule that we've adopted.
If I might just add, I really think personally, and I don't know how all of you feel, but this review of the articles is very tedious. It takes a lot of time, and it requires a lot from our legal counsel. And so we might want to consider meetings that just deal with the articles, because like we have people coming in at the next meeting for presentations. We had presentations tonight from Mayor Hollister. That went a little long. So maybe we want to have just some special meetings to get through this article business. So that's a thought.
Thank you. If you want, I can send something out. That's what I'll do. Let me put something together and I'll send it out. Commissioner Washington.
I'm confused, Commissioner Boyd. Do you want presentations on one day and articles on another, or do you want to do away with presentations? Because there are some coming up that I think are critical.
No, I'm not suggesting that we should do away with presentations. I'm saying that the article review is very important, and we might want to have meetings that just deal with the article review. Thank you.
You good? Okay. Anything else? So, Commissioner Lopez.
So at the next meeting, we have some presentations, right? Are we scheduled to have additional presentations?
Yes.
Maybe we could have a third meeting in the month just to do with articles.
We could, let's ramp it up. I don't think we have to, I think the idea that Commissioner Boyd puts forward, if we use a second meeting, it's just for articles and review of articles, I think that would really help. And we could still do presentations and still do some article review at that meeting as well. I don't think they should be exclusive, but for the special meetings.
I still think we may need to add meetings, you know, because of the timeline now.
I think we should be really flexible. And if we need to do it, then we just add them. So let's give it a shot and see what happens.
Well,
So-
Tuesdays work for me.
All right, let's move on to Article 3. We'll start out, there was a memo that Emery presented to us. This was regarding the proposed language for 3-202.2. This was the notice requirement that has to be given for these special meetings that are called. And so I guess I turn this over to Chris, and does this take care of your concerns?
Yes, I understand and wholeheartedly believe that we want to make sure that if there is a special meeting, council members are fully aware of it in time to be there. Frankly, 90% of the time they're aware of it before I receive the official notice from the mayor, so I'm delivering things to people who aren't surprised to see me. Anything that we can do to make it more efficient is great, but I would definitely intend to make sure that there is a receipt and acknowledgement of every notice.
Well, I'm here.
Yes, Kristen, have you seen this language?
Yeah, I have seen that.
Probably for another time.
I mean, is there a need to specify how the receipt of verification is going to be made?
I don't think so. I mean, what I have been doing for the past several years, although thankfully we haven't had one in a little while, you know, I create a list, and then when I drop it off at their homes, I sign and date my action. So I have documentation with the special meeting packet of my actions.
Okay.
So, you know, I think it would probably become more of notes, you know. I spoke personally with council member X, and council member Y responded to an email, and, you know.
Okay. Any other comments or questions, concerns? So a motion would be in order to adopt the language that is presented in the memorandum that's regarding proposed language for 3-202.2. It would be to replace the language that currently exists with the language that's in that memo. Does everybody understand what we're doing? It was, okay. Any other questions? Motion be in order to approve? Okay. Is there support? And there's support. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It is adopted. Wait, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
I'm not sure I understand this correctly. I know what the problem is, and I know we want to avoid having to drive to every house like I had to do at one time. But I'm not sure I understand this. 18 hours before the meeting, the clerk shall publish a notice, that would be Chris, of the meeting in the manners pursuant to law, shall cause each council member to be personally notified and shall verify receipt of the notification by each council member. So you're saying you're going to send an email, and they're going to have to verify that they received the email. Are you asking them to verify it by a certain time, date?
Yes.
You are, but it doesn't
And
say
I'll
that
be
in here.
calling them and texting them, and yes. Which is better than driving
Oh, you don't want to drive to everybody's house. That's a nightmare.
in a snowstorm.
In a
Remember
snowstorm.
which
It's
happened-
bad even
which
on a
did
hot
happen
sunny
once,
day,
remember,
which is when I
when
did it.
No one had power.
Can we amend that to say that you've got to have notice? You know, the council person has to acknowledge receipt of the notice by a certain time?
Verify.
Verify?
Verify receipt. So-
Receipt of notification by each council member, but it doesn't say when.
At least 18 hours before the meeting.
Yeah, no, 18 hours before the meeting, you're going to send the email. Yeah.
And I shall verify receipt of the notification by 18
Yeah.
hours. Yes.
But we don't say the date. Now, if you're fine with it, I'm fine with it.
It was moved and supported, and was there a vote? Commissioner Lopez.
Yeah, when you send an email, can you, do you have the system where you know if the person read the email?
I do, or I can. Sometimes it's not reliable, and I would not rely on that because they might share an email. If it's their city email, they wouldn't, but maybe I send it to both their personal and their work email, and maybe they share their personal email with their spouse. So I'm not going to rely on a read receipt from an email system. I'm going to seek a reply or a phone call or a text.
I think I'm just thinking because if you don't get that, then you might want to make a call.
That's what he's saying.
Well, right, yes, yes. Or drop it off at their house, and then I know they received it. I mean, there might be one that I have to drop it off at their house because, right.
This 18 hours complies with Open Meetings Act, right?
So the Open Meeting Act just requires the public notice within 18 hours. It doesn't actually talk about any notice for the commissioners. So you could conceivably have less notice for all the commissioners than 18 hours in order to comply with the Open Meetings Act. So it does, yes.
Any further comments? It's been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, we're still on Article 3. Ms. Kristen, this is yours.
Okay. So there were a few sections where there were some questions and discussion at the last meeting and requests for some language. First of those, and I'm looking at page 29 of 52 of the packet, beginning there. Definition of quorum. So currently, quorum is defined by a specific number, which is premised on a total number of being 8. So currently, 5 is required for a quorum. And so the request was had to reword this to sort of define quorum without necessarily being specific to a number. So there's a couple ways you can do that, and that depends on how you want to define quorum. At the end of the day, it can either be members serving, which would account for a vacancy. So you could have your quorum change based on vacancies. So option 1 provides that a majority of the council members serving shall be a quorum. The other option you can do is what we call like all seats. So it does not account for vacancies. So regardless of vacancies, you would still need a majority of council members established by this charter, which again would be dependent on what our number is. This is essentially what is currently in place with the current charter by stating 5 is it is a majority of the number of council members established by the charter is 5. So that would, the all seats option 2 would be kind of what the current charter requires. Then the other issue that had come up was this discussion between recess or adjourn, because the current charter provides that any number less than a quorum may recess a meeting to the extent that you lose a quorum. And the question was, well, should that say recess or should it say adjourn? Based on our review of other charters, we found that most of them use the word adjourn. Recess and adjourn do mean different things under Robert Rules of Order. Recess means you are pausing that particular meeting for a number of time to come back and resume that meeting, whereas adjourn means that meeting is over. So there could be a situation where you may want to recess if you lose a quorum, but you know you're going to have it again. The Open Meetings Act states that you can recess a meeting without having to recomply with Open Meetings Act, so long as that recess is less than 36 hours. So what we did was we put recess or adjourn to the extent that you wanted to have sort of both things spelled out as powers or abilities for a number that is less than a quorum to do, to deal with sort of procedural pausing or ending the meeting. So we do have option 1 is serving, which would account for a vacancy on the board, and then option 2 would be an all seats option. The other thing too is if you think that this is too wordy, we could always wait until you decide on a number, and then whatever your total number of the boards is of the commission is, you could come back and just put in a hard number based on that decision later.
Any questions? Commissioner Kui?
I would just like to make a motion for option 2 proposed.
Commissioner Lopez?
I second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Questions? Any discussion on this? I would just ask, in terms of an adjournment, if anything is ever adjourned, is the posting requirements then automatic? We go back to how we originally posted?
Yeah, you'd have to, whatever Open Meetings Act would require. So yeah, if that's over, then that meeting is done, and so now you're going to have a new meeting, and that new meeting would have to comply with Open Meetings Act.
But then under recess, you have 36 hours?
Yes, although practically speaking, I don't know how often a local board actually recesses for that long. It's usually only a couple hours in my experience, but Chris is giving me eyebrows, so.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
The recess can be for a longer time as long as there's additional notice. We had this come up one year when the council could not agree on a president, and we could not adjourn the first council meeting of the year
I remember.
for 3 weeks or so. We had to recess because the first council meeting, the council is required to elect a council president. So the recess can be for longer if there's additional notice, so.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you for that clarification.
I remember that. Commissioner Washington.
I guess I'm wondering what the wisdom or purpose behind this number 2 is. I mean, I'm more in favor of serving because if there's a vacancy, I don't like the idea of considering that as having to be part of the majority. I mean, if it's vacant, it's vacant. So I would prefer, and I know the motion's already out there, so I will vote no, because I would really prefer to see serving rather than established by charter. We don't know, so that's my reasoning for what my no vote would be.
I'm on the same page. I agree with the serving versus the.
Okay. Any other, any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion, and this would be for a majority of the number of council members established by this charter, and it will also include the recess or adjournment language. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we have 2 opposed. Thank you. Next.
Okay, so along those same lines, section 3.205 on voting also defines what a majority and a supermajority is in terms of what is needed to pass a resolution or ordinance. So currently, I believe it says 5 members are required to have an affirmative vote. And then when we're dealing with situations where a 2/3 vote is required, it currently says 6 members, and then, but if there is a vacancy, then it allows for 5 members in that situation. So option 1 is a serving option, which you could actually have that without it. It wouldn't make sense because if you do option 2, it probably makes more sense to have option 2 for this section. But option 1 is would define the number required to just be a majority of council members serving. But then specify that if it's a 2/3 requirement, that it requires 2/3 of the members serving. Because the serving requirement would already sort of account for a vacancy, that second sentence could be stricken. For option 2, all seats, then the change would be, again, changing it from 5 to a majority of the number of council members established by charter. And then when we're dealing with situations where a 2/3 vote is needed, it would be require an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the number of members established by the charter. If one or more vacancies are, and then to try to account for this second sentence that currently exists, which does allow for a 2/3 with a vacancy, the proposed option to kind of keep that intent is if there are 1 or more vacancies existing on the council and a vote of 2/3 of the council members serving is required, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the council members serving shall be sufficient to adopt.
Commissioner Boyd.
I have a problem with this because of the 2/3 language. Because under our current city council, you can't have 2/3. I mean, you can have a majority, you can have 3/4, you can have a half, but you can't have 2/3 because of the number. So I would suggest that we might want to table this until we decide what the makeup of the council is going to be, and then we can come back to this. But as is written, I don't think it works. Thank you.
Other comments? Commissioner Washington agrees. Any other comments? So is this, I don't know.
I believe there are state law requirements for a 2/3 vote in some circumstances, so I think you do need probably to address what a 2/3 vote is. And it is simply 2 times the number of people, of council members supporting versus opposing. So 6 is more than 2 times of 3, or, I'm sorry, is more than 2 times of 2. So if you have a 6-2 vote, that is 2/3. It has to be 2/3 or more. It doesn't have to be exactly 2/3. Obviously, you can't have, it's a minimum of 2/3. Immediate effect votes are 2/3. So no matter what the number is, you also have other ratios, I believe, in a zoning situation, and this vote doesn't account for it. In certain zoning situations, under state law, you have, I think it's a 3/4 requirement for some zoning, and in the Home Rule Cities Act, you have a 3/5 requirement. You're never going to get where.
I defer to you, Clerk Swope, but I think I'd like to see the state language that explains that. No offense.
Any other comments? So is there, I don't know if we want to table this, because we can only table for one. Is it one meeting?
I do have a comment.
All right, let's go ahead. I'm sorry. Commissioner Kuwait.
Wait, you see,
Yeah, we'll just take it off. Okay. All right, moving on, section 3.206.
Okay, investigations. I believe the discussion at the last meeting was whether city council itself should be the investigator or have some ability to appoint someone to do an investigation. It is a standard treatment or provision in city charters that we have found that that the city legislative body does have investigative power, but then there's always a little bit of differences in what that means. But I would say current general what's generally in here in 3-206 is pretty common, what you'll find in charters. But to the extent you want to clarify that, the city council does have this authority to appoint someone to do the investigation for them and bring that back to them. We did find some language in the City of Midland's charter, which I thought was, clear, concise, and addressed, I think, what your concern was. So the proposed language would be just to add, and this is on page 32 of 52, add a clause in there that just says the city council, the new phrase would be, or any person or committee authorized it for the purpose, comma, may make investigation into the affairs. So the city council could authorize someone to do that investigation for them. But no other changes otherwise in that section.
Are there any comments, Commissioner Boyd?
Wouldn't you need to add that language then to 2 and 3? So it would say the city council or any person or committee authorized by it for the purpose may subpoena witnesses. Wouldn't you need to continue that language?
I think you could have the city council make the decision to authorize, in terms of one, to the extent that they are authorized to do the investigation, decide what types of authority to give them, whether they want to give them subpoena or administer oaths. So I think it would be sufficient under point 1, but we could certainly look at adding it to point 2. I'm looking at point 3 to see if we'd have to add it to point 3. I don't think it's necessary, but.
Well, I think this was one of the issues that I brought up the last time. I can't swear to that, but I think this is one that I raised. And the notion that a city council is doing an investigation is problematic because I don't think it's their role to do that. So I like the addition of the language in point 1, or any person or committee, blah, blah. But, I guess I would like to see that language continued if we're going to use it.
So then in point 2, you would like after the city council, then comma, and then or any person or committee authorized by it for the purpose, comma.
But it still allows the city council to do the investigation. And I think that's the question. Is
Okay.
it appropriate for the city council to do that kind of investigation? And I think the answer is no.
There are certainly situations where a city council does do investigations, and it could be a situation where they actually have the actual work presented, done by a designee or a subcommittee, but then presented to the board for a determination. And again, this is pretty standard language that we've seen throughout other charters in the state. I guess to your other question I would have for you as well is under point 3, would you like to see that same language inserted in there as well? Or leave it to the city council to have to be the one to apply to the court? I think if you were going to add it, I think it would have to go again right after city council.
If I were going to do this, if I were going to make this draft, I would draft it as I brought it up the last time. Okay. I would say the city council may order an independent investigation. I would not say the city council may do the investigation. And again, I'm not sure my fellow commissioners agree with that, but that was my point.
Other comments or questions? Commissioner Bauer.
I guess I would ask our attorney or anybody who would have the information, do other city councils, is it pretty standard that city councils have the power to do investigations?
Yes, based on my survey of charter language in doing this work, yes, this is pretty standard language that's in there. It's not perhaps used often, but there are circumstances where there may be situations where the council needs to review something. An example I can think of is liquor licenses. So under state law, there is a method by which a city can determine to ask the LCC to revoke a liquor license. And then there's essentially an investigation, often not itself done by the city commission, it's put together by the police department or the city attorney's office, and then presented to the city commission for the determination. To Commissioner Boyd's point, then it was authorized to present to them with the determination of how to move forward.
I don't see those as being the same. I mean, I think if the city council wants to look into a liquor license or get the background or whatever, I don't consider that necessarily an investigation. I think this is addressing, problems within city government, investigations. I mean, we think there's corruption. We think a member of city council isn't doing their job. I don't know what it is, but I think the description of investigation is different from what you described from what I'm thinking. I could be wrong.
Commissioner Anderson? Nope. Okay, anybody else? Commissioner Lopez?
And I'm wondering if this is investigating city agency. So is there any, or would it be of any help to put what types of investigations are we allowed to, or that the charter, that the council can do? For example, what was mentioned, maybe some city department head is being accused of siphoning money, okay, for an example. Maybe there are areas that don't come to the level of city council making investigations, doing investigations, but the mayor's office, they work for him or her. And so what are the levels, I guess I'm asking, what are the levels that would rise to the point where city council would get involved in an investigation?
Well, it's pretty broad in this statement in terms of what this provision states, is just the affairs of the city and the conduct of any city agency. So that's pretty broad. To the extent, it's a fair, it could
be the mayor being investigated.
But then you get, and obviously you get into sort of statutory interpretation and you have to reconcile all this provision with other provisions, and there could be some conflict internally, and how do you reconcile them all? But this currently is rather broadly stated to just affairs of the city and the conduct of any city agency. So in terms of what powers you give your city council, you can certainly define it more specifically if you think that's necessary. The more specific you get, you could be shutting out some areas of what they would have the discretion and ability to investigate.
Well, and then an attorney, the city attorney, would read this and come up with whatever the attorney's position was on this language, whether it's enough to do an investigation or not.
Yeah, it's going to depend. Part of the difficulty with this is, we're looking at generally what the powers are. It's really hard to you want to try as best you can to see how this would apply to hypotheticals, but we can't possibly accommodate or think of all potential hypotheticals of what may happen and how this will actually apply in practice. So there may be a situation where, yes, someone would have to look at it and decide, well, does this apply to these facts? And when analyzing this section, you can't always look at it. You can't look at it in a vacuum. You have to, take the charter as a whole and make sure that it's copacetic with the other provisions. But again, it does state the affairs of the city and the conduct of any city agency.
And just for final, I would, because this kind of would be usurping the mayor's, authority to do the investigations in him or herself.
I believe, obviously the mayor is the chief executive officer of the city, so he or she would have certain authorities as well, but that would be an issue of reconciling the charter provisions with themselves as well as, are there checks and balances in terms of how this is interpreted? So.
Well, I would think, my understanding of this is I would think the mayor has their own, or his or her own independent authority to do any kind of investigation regarding the city affairs. That's, I would think, what a chief executive officer would do and be responsible for.
Yeah, and I think really what it comes down to is when you're talking about a separation of powers, as it were, is, are they stepping on each other's toes? And that's often where the fight comes, not necessarily you have, you don't have any right at all. It's they're both going to have some level of rights currently as it exists in the charter, but there could be some issues with interpretation of whether and how those apply as interpreted with each other.
Yeah, I think this section is, I think, very important to the city council. In terms of its oversight authority and, making sure things are transparent and everybody knows what's going on. I think they have to have this kind of power and authority to do their work. Whether they exercise it or not, that's another thing. But I think in order to do their job, I think this is a critical section of responsibilities and authority that they have to have. And that's just my 2 cents. So on the proposed language, is there anyone who wants to make a motion to adopt or any person or committee authorized by it for the purpose? I'm sorry, go ahead. It's been moved. Is there support? Support. It's been moved and supported. And my question was going to be, do we include that language then in every subsection, point 1 through point 3? And we would insert that after the city council in each subsection, is that correct?
That's certainly up to you.
Well, does that make sense? The city, yeah, it would. Okay, so, all right, let's just do this. We'll do the first one that's been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, passes unanimously. Then in point 2, after city council, put a comma and then insert or any person or committee authorized by it for the purpose, comma. Is there a motion to move that and support? It's been moved and supported. All those in favor say aye. And then as well in point, okay. Commissioner Boyd? Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Boyd has voted no on point 1 and point 2, so we'll make sure the record reflects that. And then in point 3, near the end of the sentence, after city council, we'll put a comma or any person or committee authorized by it for the purpose, comma. Is this any motion to move and support? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, Commissioner Boyd voting no. I do have a question. The next section in your memo to us is section 3.207, rights and responsibility of council members. There are no changes being proposed, but I want to know what are the consequences if under this section, when request for information is being made by city council and they either get stonewalled or basically told, no, we're not going to give it to you. There doesn't appear to be any consequences here for that. What can we put in there to give them some teeth?
I think it's going to depend on who they're asking. Because it to a certain extent may be part of a political question of, if the council is asking the mayor and, there's, I guess, an argument or disagreement between them. The real issue becomes too, this is not uncommon, if you have a council asking a city employee for information, the supervisor, director, the agency department head, as a matter of, I think, clarity and consistency, may want that information not coming from an employee but from the director. And so to a certain extent, a lot of these issues are sort of interpersonal issues and sort of adhering to the pecking order, as it were, because certainly, if you have employees that are covered by a collective bargaining agreement, and you've got their supervisor telling them, don't answer, I'll handle the city council, and you have city council saying, give me this now, you don't necessarily want to put the city employee in a bind when it's two sort of elected officials arguing.
Usually it's been my experience when I was on council that this would typically happen during budget time, when you have a department head in here presenting a budget and you're asking very specific questions, and basically you get no responses, or you don't get the information that you requested given to you, the documents or whatever. So it's not I understand calling out an employee might be problematic, but this is a legislative function, this is what that covers. And basically they're being told to say no. So what rights does the council have at that point to demand it and to get that information?
Part of it could be a political question of how you deal with each other interpersonally. Part of it is that could get into the investigative matter. And what are your authorities under the investigations if you open a full investigation? But to the extent that you desire teeth, again, it gets really into the purview of those checks and balances between the mayor and the city council, which is much more difficult when you have a strong mayor city council issue. I'm trying to think of how to provide more teeth in a manner that,
Well, the teeth are consequences. There's got to be a consequence. If council, under these rules, under the charter, and they're following it, it's for a legislative purpose, legitimately asking the question. I understand politics, but it's a legitimate question, it's reasonable, and they're getting stonewalled. What are the consequences? There's got to be a consequence to this. Mr. Deb.
And I think the interesting language in that section also states that they had received specific information in response, but it's so vague that somebody could realistically say, no, I don't want to provide that it's not included in what I'm allowed to provide to you. Because that clause, that section of the charter right now gives no examples of what's specific or not.
Mr. President,
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Lopez.
would it be possible to insert something to the effect that if information requested is not provided within a reasonable, and I don't know what reasonable is, time, that the council may subpoena that information?
Yeah, you can launch an investigation, I suppose, and do it that way.
It doesn't make for good working relationships, but.
Well,
Or it may, I don't know.
yeah. It's a subpoena, you might get the information, but you want to stop the behavior, is what you want to do, and I don't know if a subpoena will get you there. But anyway, Commissioner Washington.
I have to agree with you 100%. I served on council with Commissioner Jeffries, and it happened all the time. And I actually see it happening now, where because I'm at all the council meetings, where they'll ask for something and it never really comes back. It's vague, and it makes the legislative body unable to do their job for us, the people. So I agree. Something has to be in there because we may not always have a benevolent mayor. This is not for today. This is for probably another 100 years because we put it in there that it won't be looked at. So, this is just, I agree. It was so frustrating and it made it almost impossible.
So we could insert a timeline. Or
Yeah, I
something
guess
like
I'd ask our attorney if you could go back and do a search of other charters and see if there's any kind of enforcement powers or consequences. Not only in a situation like this, but there are other situations when, yeah, exactly. So we'll have that brought back to us next meeting.
Yep.
Thank you. And then section 3-306, effective date of the ordinance. We had a couple of options there.
So the question presented was, could this be amended to allow for shorter effective dates? Currently, all ordinances have a standard 30 days after enactment, 1201 on the 30th day after enactment, but then there's a provision to provide immediate effect to an emergency ordinance. There are, the effective date of the ordinance you can establish what you would like to be the standard procedure for your effective date. So it could be shorter than 30 if you want. There are, for example, Zoning Enabling Act allows for 7 days after publication. There are some charters that the standard rule is immediate effect unless it's specified in the ordinance when it goes into effect. So you have the ability to kind of state what that is. And so if 30 days is not meeting the needs, you could redefine that. And I suppose one of the questions I have for the commission is, is there a desire to change the standard so that, it's, change that 30 days to something less for everything, or keep the 30 days but allow some sort of valve for shorter timeframes for something less than an emergency? So option one, and again, we picked a date, but this is certainly open to review by the board. And understand, too, that this is a general rule for city ordinances. There could be circumstances where the city is looking at drafting or amending an ordinance that state law may require longer time, but that can be dealt with in drafting of that ordinance by specifically providing an enactment date. Further guidance is needed in terms of, are you looking to change the 30 days for everything or provide an additional valve for shorter timeframes for specific ordinances?
Commissioner Boyd.
I am not a fan of our compliance office. Let me just say that from the beginning. I've emailed them about a certain problem, and I haven't even gotten a response from them, and it's been like 3 months. It's a new year. I'm beginning to think I'm going to restart my complaints. But with that said, have we asked the compliance office about this? Because maybe they need 30 days. I don't know. I mean, I would be curious to know what they have to say about this before we go and change the date, the effective date of an ordinance.
Chris?
I don't know.
I'm not understanding the question.
So
This is
right,
the
so
effective
right
date of
now, if the
code-
city council passes an ordinance,
Right.
it takes 30 days, right?
Correct.
Unless there's some other
Yeah.
extenuating
Immediate effect,
circumstances. So this language would shorten it to 14 days, goes into effect in 14 days. My question is, what does the compliance office have to say about this? Do they traditionally need 30 days to put an ordinance into
I'm not
place?
sure what you mean by compliance office, I guess.
Well, if you've got a code compliance, I mean, if an ordinance, basically, most ordinances are dealt with by code compliance, right? Maybe not?
No.
Okay.
No. No. Honestly, I would estimate that 2/3 or more of the ordinances that get adopted get immediate effect.
So it's not an
I
issue?
think if they need a longer effective date, they can put that in. And I don't think there's been a problem with 30 days, and I think the issue, I know I mentioned this, that we have been unable to give zoning ordinances immediate effect or sooner effect, because state law says 14 days, which isn't 30 or 0.
Right.
Or immediate. So it's got to be 30, because
Okay.
state law limits it to 14. So
So you think the city government would be okay with a change, reducing the effective date from 30 days to 14?
I would think so, but I'm not sure that that's necessary. I think option 2 is fine as well.
And then I
To-
just want
to-
to point
to
out,
address
this
that.
also has the 2/3 number in it, which we were going to check.
Commissioner
Anyway.
Washington.
I just have a question about this. I frankly never understood what the wisdom was behind the 30 days. To me, I would think immediate effect would be the appropriate thing unless it doesn't, and the language can say unless it doesn't comply with state law or, the issue. But I don't see any reason for the waiting time for almost any of these ordinances that have ever been passed.
Commissioner Dow.
So just to answer that, because smart thinking. So the option 2, though, because we need that 14 days, right, for the ones you're talking about, or 0?
I think either option would address.
Okay. I just am trying to make sure I'm on the same page about the desire here.
Kristen, in terms of the 14 days, was that because of the veto?
Yes, for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you're really concerned about the Zoning Enabling Act, the way that that's defined is 7 days after, I believe it's publication. So it's not necessarily the date that they voted in, but you have to allow a little bit of time for publication. But also, yes, because there is a certain amount you've extended the time to 9 working days for a veto, and it can get real confusing if you have a law that's gone into effect and then it's been vetoed. So the recommendation was to extend this out a little bit to at least give that time so that you don't have these weird provisions where it might have been in effect in one day and then it gets vetoed the next day. Although, I mean, if you get, there are certainly laws where you can have immediate effect and then it gets vetoed. But in terms of those types of laws that may affect individuals, criminal laws, for example, criminal ordinances, that may be something you want to think about.
So what's the pleasure of the board? Anyone? Commissioner Washington.
As I am listening, I think the 14 days does make sense because it does give time for the veto, and then the mayor does have that right.
Is that a motion?
Yes.
Option 1?
Support.
Then moved and supported on option 1. Is there any debate, discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Passes unanimously? Okay. Pardon? Oh, okay, excellent. Yep, got it. Okay. All right, at this time, everybody is kind of getting a little punchy here and a little tired out. We've been at this for about 3 hours. I think at this point, we'll move to wrap the meeting up. We'll be meeting, I'll be meeting with Chris and Lori later this week. We'll put together an alternative schedule. I think we'll kind of follow what Commissioner Boyd had recommended in terms of the extra meeting days to include article reviews only, but then leave the other ones open for presentations and.
And Mr. Chair, we might not only need 2 extra meetings because, we're halfway through the articles. We have Article 4, 5, 6, and 7.
And 8.
I mean, so we might only need 2 additional meetings.
Well, this is.
That's good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then we don't-
Yeah.
we don't use it.
Yeah. All right, so with that, we'll conclude that portion of the agenda. Where are we now? Are we back on public comment?
We have one person who signed in, and that is Nicholas Zandy, who is no longer here. So I think we missed him by about 10 minutes. I saw him not long ago.
Okay, so at this point, Commissioner comments, anyone? Commissioner Washington.
This may not be very popular, but I have been really disturbed at the way some of our constituents have been treated, and I would ask that we put the same amount of respect and attention to the people that maybe are not part of the privileged class. I don't come from that class, and I know what it feels like to be dismissed, and I feel it every time one of you do that to somebody that isn't as important. And I would hope that we put the same weight on what people that maybe are not quite as eloquent, what they have to say as we do, Mayor Hollister, Mayor Shore, Robert Swanson. I just am asking that when we are in the capacity of a commissioner, that we treat everyone with respect, that we don't speak down to them, we don't speak about them in disparaging manners. It's embarrassing to me, and frankly, it hurts me to the core because I know I'm part of that group, and these are the people that talk to me. I'm not in the special meetings with the high up special people. These are the people I talk to, and it hurts me to the core. You know who you are, you know what you've done, and I would just ask that it stop, and it stops now.
Commissioner Boyd.
I guess I'd like to know who you're referring to, because I certainly treat people with respect, and yet I feel, as a commissioner, that I have been disrespected. I mean, I sat here, I ran for this office, I spent my own money for running for this office, even though everybody thinks the chamber paid for it. They did not. And I give up my time to do this, and I've sat here and been called un-American because of the things that I have said.
Well,
and
since you-
and let me finish. That hurts me, and I treat everybody who comes here with respect. And I have not said otherwise to anyone who comes here. Half the time, people come and stand at that microphone, and they don't even give their address. I don't know who they are. I don't know until I get the minutes who they are, because they don't say their names.
First of all, as commissioner, you need to take whatever's
Commissioner.
given to you, and you need to have skin like an elephant if you're going to be in an elected position. You can't be having your feelings hurt. Since you did ask me who, yes, you are one of them I am talking about. And I have
take
heard it
exception
from
to
so many people, and I don't want to continue
Come on,
this.
Personal stuff has to stop. Come on.
My point was made. She asked,
All
I
right,
answered.
All right, let's move on. Any other comments? Hearing none? We're adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry. Jasmine?
I know Miss Leslie came and spoke about it earlier, but she did message me, so I just wanted to bring it up and confirm that no Facebook comments are being deleted, correct? Okay, I told her I would bring it up, so I'm just,
And no tags are being removed.
Okay.
By us if people are, no.
okay. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Jeffrey Wright noted that there's a kind of traveling circus that Wes is the ringmaster of, because he does have many of the same actors who appear in his films, and on the set actually treats you all very much like family with these dinners that happened after filming. You have talked a bit about this in the past, but there's also like this playfulness and specificity in the way that Wes Anderson shoots his films. And